Hi there, it's Keith from the Evangelical Free Church Stony Stratford, and we're continuing our series of short talks in the Gospel of Luke. And today we're looking at chapter 8, verses 22 to 25. It starts with a apparently simple scenario. Jesus has said to his disciples that they're going to cross to the other side of the lake. But part way across, they hit this tremendous storm. How did it blow up so quickly? Well, when my wife and I were on holiday in Turkey at one time, at the end of the season, we saw tremendous storms over the mountains each night. And the reason for this was that the cold air that was coming down from Europe was meeting the hot air coming up from Africa. It was quite spectacular to see the thunder and lightning. And the situation in the Sea of Galilee is the same. It's 600 feet below sea level, and cold air comes down into that basin and hits the hot air, causing tremendous storms. I actually once saw a couple of photos that a friend had taken when they'd been to Israel, and they were half an hour apart and showing the Sea of Galilee. And one was beautiful sunshine, and half an hour later, dark clouds, massive waves. Well, the disciples are terrified. They're so terrified, they wake Jesus up. This seems to be comparable to what we read in Mark's Gospel, chapter 4, where he's been teaching from the boat and he's probably worn out and asleep. They go and wake him and they say, "Master, we're going to drown." Jesus' reaction is interesting, to say the least. We read in the second part of verse 24, he got up and rebuked the wind and the raging waters. The storm subsided and all was calm. And his reaction after that is also interesting. As he says to his disciples, verse 25, "Where is your faith?" Point seems to be made that if he said they were going to get to the other side of the lake, they were going to get to the other side of the lake. Why couldn't they trust him on that? The other thing to note is how quickly the storm dies down. Usually after the wind drops, waves will remain for some time, but Jesus says the word and the storm is stilled. And his disciples' reaction is interesting. We note that they say, in fear and amazement, they ask one another, "Who is this? He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him." You might think they'd be pretty relieved that the storm is over. But no, that phrase, in fear and amazement. You see, they knew their Bible, or what we call the Old Testament. They would have known about Elijah, who prayed that the Lord would withhold rain for 3.5 years. He did, and then he prayed again, and the Lord sent rain. So he knew he controlled the weather. But even more remarkably, in the Psalms, it says this. And this is Psalm 89, verse 8 and 9. "O Lord Almighty, who is like you? You are mighty, O Lord, and your faithfulness surrounds you. You rule over the surging sea. When its waves mount up, you still them." I think it's almost certain they had that in mind. And so they're asking, who is this? And in a sense, they're kind of attuned to the answer. Only God can do this. There's two things perhaps to take from this. Jesus has authority over all things, even nature. And he can be depended on. As I said, he said they were going to get to the other side of the lake. They were going to get to the other side of the lake. And the second is this, the question that the disciples asked, who is this? In the book of Hebrews, in the first chapter and verse 3, we read this about Jesus. "The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. What does that tell us? Firstly, Jesus is God becoming man. He's the exact representation. He does what God does. He sustains all things. And here's the second thing. He has provided the perfect sacrifice for sin. That's what purification for sin means. He's provided that for me and you. We all need it. Being a pastor doesn't make you special in God's sight, believe you me. You fail just as much as everyone else. But Jesus has provided a way back to God. We've been made pure when we accept the forgiveness for our sins. And here's the other thing. It satisfies God. This payment is enough. The whole picture, the imagery that's used there is one of a priest offering a sacrifice. And in the tabernacle, there were no chairs. People have a nasty habit of doing the wrong things, so the priests were always busy sacrificing for the sins of the people. They couldn't sit down halfway through and think, I'll take a rest, a breather. No. They could only do that when everything was finished and they went back to their home. Here's the picture. Jesus sits down at God's right hand. God looks on this sacrifice and he approves of it. Isn't that a wonderful thing? And it proves we can put our trust in Jesus and be made right with God. Thank you so much for listening.